In this training, you will learn about the crime of human trafficking, including legal definitions, how to identify the signs and indicators of human trafficking, and understanding the types and forms of trafficking.
Human trafficking is happening here in Ohio, but what exactly is it? Starkly put, it's a modern-day slave trade where boys, girls, men and women are exploited and forced into hard labor or prostitution. It may shock you to know that the number of Ohio children being trafficked across our state today could fill a large high school. An estimated 1,000 children every year are being exploited in our communities and forced into the commercial sex trade. As a result of the extensive awareness and the training efforts throughout our state, we're beginning to see many more survivors come out of the shadows who have endured forced or compelled service for someone else's profit. Awareness is one of our biggest weapons against human trafficking, and it does work. It's important to have conversations with your friends, your neighbors, and colleagues to spread the word. After all, this modern-day slave trade could very well be happening right in your community. In Ohio, we've had trafficking cases in urban and rural areas, in suburbs and cities. No neighborhood is immune. In 2012, I signed an executive order to take on this fight. Later, I signed a number of bills into law which significantly strengthened protections for victims of human trafficking and increased penalties for offenders. Since Ohio's Safe Harbor Law was enacted in 2012, we have been convicting traffickers in our state, and our law enforcement partners have assisted in many successful federal prosecutions as well. Among other successes, enactment of these laws means that many juvenile courts are working to protect and empower exploited children and youth who were previously treated as criminals. But to really make a difference, we of course need your help. After all, these are our children, our family members, and our friends. And it's our responsibility to fight back against this terrible crime. Through the efforts of the Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force and our many partners in law enforcement, we're really starting to make a real impact. We're finding and saving boys and girls, young men and women, all over our state. Awareness and training really do work. The challenge here is that trafficking can be hiding in plain sight and isn't easily visible to the untrained eye. In this video, you will hear from human trafficking survivors and learn about their horrific experience and difficult walk to recovery. You'll also learn what human trafficking really means, the grave nature of the problem, and most important in our efforts to fight back, the signs to look out for and how to help. Thank you. Thank you very much for being our partner in this fight to stop human trafficking. God bless.
Understanding the crime of human trafficking. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery where people profit from the control and exploitation of other people. It is often referred to as the compelled service of others for profit. In order for a crime to fit the federal definition of human trafficking, someone must use force, fraud, or coercion to exploit another person. Ohio's legal definition varies slightly, but the idea is the same. Traffickers use compulsion to bring about the exploitation of others. According to the Polaris Project, a nationally recognized anti-trafficking nonprofit organization, human trafficking affects every country around the world, regardless of socioeconomic status, history, or political structure. Traffickers have created an international market for the trade of human beings based on high profits and demand for commercial sex and cheap labor. This map from the International Labor Organization shows the estimated number of trafficking victims in the world by geographical region. Asia alone is thought to have an estimated 11.7 million victims of sex and labor trafficking. The U.S. Department of State's annual Trafficking in Persons report provides a picture of what sex trafficking looks like around the world. The woman in the image on the left is a victim of sex trafficking in Colombia. As in many other countries, including the United States, Sex trafficking victims suffer psychological and physical abuse, some at the hands of organized crime and gangs who use threats and debt bondage to force their victims into prostitution. The image on the right shows girls who suffer from commercial sexual exploitation in India. Experts estimate millions of people are victims of sex trafficking in India, including many in brothels on Delhi's notorious Garston Bastion Road. Also taken from the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report, the images shown here are global instances of labor trafficking. The women pictured on the right are in debt bondage. Debt bondage has been reported in the agricultural sector in South Asia and can cripple entire families. If an exploited elder cannot repay an initial debt, it can be inherited by his descendants. The young girl on the left was sold by her parents in Haiti. In Haiti, parents send their children to live with and work for an outside family that agrees to provide food, clothing, and shelter. But many families exploit these children and subject them to domestic servitude and physical, sexual, and other types of abuse. The International Organization for Migration estimates there are 21 million victims of human trafficking in the world. Most known victims are labor trafficking victims, including women, children, and men. The men in this photo were released from forced labor on a fishing vessel. When asked who would like to go home, they all raised their hands. Here in the United States, according to the Polaris Project, an estimated 100,000 children are victims of commercial sexual exploitation. In Ohio, there are an estimated 1,000 children being commercially sexually exploited today, and an estimated 3,000 runaways are at risk of being trafficked. In recent years, different state agencies and partners have begun tracking victims identified by law enforcement and service providers. Due to these efforts, Ohio now has data from primary sources for the first time. Identified victims are as young as 6 years old. Please visit humantrafficking.ohio.gov for detailed data and reports about identified trafficking survivors in Ohio. The following video provides a brief overview of human trafficking in Ohio, as well as our state and local response to the crime.
Every day in our state and all across the nation, a terrible and heartbreaking crime is being committed. Vulnerable young people are thrown, drawn, and coerced into a cycle of abuse, terror, and endless sexual degradation. The specter of human trafficking is all too real and is nothing short of a modern slavery of the most vile kind. Traffickers seek out the hurting, lonely, and abused.
Anybody I've ever trusted in my life has hurt me, including my mother, my father, that guy that was creeping in my bedroom when I was 4. Like, all these people who I trusted with my life have hurt me. When I was being trafficked, I had no idea that's what was happening to me. I actually blamed it all on myself. I put myself in this situation. I'm just this terrible person, drug addict, mom, and I deserve this stuff. And that I didn't know is what the traffickers want and try to make us believe, because then they have control. Then they have like the psychological control over us.
Really, essentially, a lot of this is, they're a very vulnerable population. The runaways, the missings that are in our towns, our cities, out on the streets. And these pimps and traffickers, they target them. And so they're already vulnerable to begin with. Maybe have a history of sexual abuse, maybe don't have very good parents, don't have anybody that cares for them, and they have nowhere to go. It's not like the movie Taken, where a van pulls up and you're kidnapped. It's a slow process, a slow recruitment process. But these guys are specifically targeting this vulnerable population.
It was dark. It was really dark. I believe the world is dark. The women believe the world is dark.
Judge Paul Herbert sits on the Franklin County Municipal Court.
96% of all juvenile prostitutes are runaways, and they're running away from something. People think human trafficking is all the way over here. We have this real small population, maybe not even in Ohio, of these foreign-born girls that are kidnapped, drugged up, and sold for sex. And we've got this other dichotomous relationship with this prostitute who, like the movie Pretty Woman, is engaged in this voluntarily. It's something that she chooses, and that's not true at all. We developed a human trafficking assessment tool. We got some help from the Polaris Project out of Washington, D.C., which is a think tank. We pieced together some of their information. We started giving every woman charged with prostitution this human trafficking assessment tool. And the numbers are staggering when you compare that to the law. We found that over 92% of every woman arrested for prostitution actually falls within the definition of being a human trafficking victim.
The Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law is developing strategies to help trafficking victims.
People have had sort of a mind shift to say, you know, we shouldn't be criminalizing these women. We should be going after the people who are purchasing, and we should be going after the people who are overall making the profits and doing the selling. And so now that we are thinking about it in that way, we can look at the women who are the ones that we see and offer them supportive services in order to help them out of that type of life and help empower them to make choices for their lives that are going to be more positive. Most of our caseload is older teenagers, 16, 17, but we have clients as young as 13. There is a human trafficking task force in Columbus that is excellent and is really devoted to helping victims rather than criminalizing them and punishing them.
The number one thing that our task force we always try to work victim-centered cases. So what that essentially means is that everything is for the victim. If we just do a sting and we get the victim out and we attach them to services through our victim advocate, to us that's a success. Would we like to have a backside criminal investigation to that? Absolutely. But our number one goal is to get the victim out of the situation, try to get them the things that they have not had.
And then once we are able to identify them as a potential victim of human trafficking, they are eligible for what's called safe harbor under Ohio law. It's a new law that was passed a couple of years ago to allow victims to obtain supportive services rather than being punished and criminalized in the juvenile court system.
These new partnerships and strategies are designed to give victims the tools to rebuild their own lives.
They want to do well, they want to get out of this lifestyle, they can't stand it. They do more on probation than they're asked to do. A lot of our women are in college, they're being reunited with their families, they are getting jobs, they're going to school, paying taxes, they volunteer throughout the community, they go into women's prisons to conduct meetings and tell them about human trafficking.
I didn't go through that and get where I'm at today to not help someone else go through that. There's no way that I'm sitting here today knowing what I know, gone through what I've gone through, and to not reach back and help someone else. So any chance that I can, if they want to listen, they want help, I'm down.
I love to see the kids be able to think positive things about themselves again.
That's what justice ought to be about.
Just to see someone go from the dark to the light, there's nothing more fulfilling than that.
In 2000, a landmark federal law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVPA, was enacted. The TVPA created the first comprehensive federal law to address human trafficking, with a significant focus on the international response to the problem. In Ohio, awareness of trafficking as a domestic problem increased in 2005 after the FBI's Operation Precious Cargo recovered 151 victims of sex trafficking from truck stop stings in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Of the 151 victims, 78 were from Toledo, and 45 of the victims were minors. Additionally, in this case, law enforcement officers were accused of reducing charges in exchange for sex and for tipping off pimps about the law enforcement investigation. Both officers were convicted. Who are the traffickers? In Ohio, traffickers have been pimps, parents and guardians, caregivers, businesses, domestic employers, seasonal farm employers, men and women, and gangs. Traffickers are anyone using force, fraud, or coercion to exploit another person for profit, and there is no profile for using force, fraud, or coercion. For example, not many would have suspected this roofing company owner of paying human traffickers to bring migrant workers from Texas and pay them less than their regular roofing crews. The roofing company eventually pleaded guilty to federal charges of human trafficking. Who are the victims? In Ohio, there have been cases including women, men, boys and girls, international and domestic, people with developmental disabilities, missing and runaway youth, and people from both rural and urban areas. Under the federal definition, anyone under 18 years of age induced into commercial sex is a victim of sex trafficking, regardless of whether or not the trafficker used force, fraud, or coercion. Victimization is not an issue of race, age, ethnicity, or gender. It is an issue of vulnerability. Human trafficking disproportionately affects vulnerable people such as runaway youth, foster care children, migrant workers, both documented and undocumented, and individuals with disabilities. Victims can be affluent or poor. According to a 2011 study by the Ohio Attorney General's Office, 13 is the most common age of entry into the commercial sex trade in Ohio. Youth with past sexual abuse and kids already involved in illegal activities are especially vulnerable to sexual exploitation. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, children who experience sexual abuse are 28 times more likely to be arrested for prostitution. A particularly challenging obstacle to victim identification is that they often do not self-identify as victims of trafficking because their vulnerabilities can make it difficult to reach and inform them about the crime of human trafficking. For example, victims may be seasonal workers with temporary visas and not self-identify out of fear of deportation.
My name is Vivian. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, and I come from a family that had no boundaries, all secrets, and simply no structure. I was able to run the streets, hang out with older people, and skip school. And this laid the groundwork for me to be taken advantage of and fall prey to people who wanted to use and abuse me. They made me think that they cared, loved, and needed me. I am a victim of human trafficking. Throughout my teenage years, I was in and out of juvenile jails, placed in foster homes, and became a ward of the state. By the age of 18, I had had 2 drunk driving charges. I was addicted to drugs and alcohol and had been arrested several times. This lifestyle made me detached from the world. I had suffered a great deal of emotional and mental abuse. At the age of 29, with the birth of my only child, I was scared that what had happened to me would eventually happen to her. I couldn't give her what I didn't have. True love, which requires no exchange, force, or coercion. I don't want you to go through the pain and the trauma and tragedy that I have gone through. You don't have to feel drained and empty to the point of being spiritually bankrupt. Know that I have received a great deal of help and support to recover and experience true unconditional love today. Don't be afraid to reach out and get help. Today, Ohio finally has a law in the books that can get you the help you need and keep you and your family safe. Help is here for you. Just reach out.
Now let's look at different human trafficking cases that took place here in Ohio. This case is an example of labor trafficking in rural areas of the state. On July 2, 2015, a grand jury in Cleveland charged 3 Ohio residents and a man from Texas with participating in a human trafficking organization that smuggled children from Guatemala and forced them to work on egg farms. In 2011, defendants and others allegedly brought workers as young as 14 to the U.S. under the false promise that they would attend school. 8 of the victims were under the age of 18, and 2 were adults. They worked 12-hour days on farms in Croton, Mount Victory, Goshen, and LaRue. The miners cleaned chicken coops, loaded and unloaded crates of chickens, debeaked, and vaccinated chickens. The defendants threatened the workers and their families and withheld money they earned to force them to work. The defendants faced multiple counts of forced labor and harboring illegal aliens. In August of 2015, the Texas man was convicted of human trafficking in federal court. Another instance of labor trafficking took place in Ashland, Ohio. In 2013, a federal indictment found that a mentally disabled woman and her child were held captive for 2 years by 3 people in the central Ohio community of Ashland. According to court documents, their traffickers used a combination of violence, threats, sexual assaults, humiliation, deprivation, and monitoring to establish and continue a pattern of domination and control over their victims. Their tactics included taunting and threatening the victims with pit bulls and snakes, causing the victims to sleep in unsafe and unsanitary conditions, preventing them from eating regular and suitable meals, and forcing them to eat dog food and crawl on the floor while wearing a dog collar, according to court documents and trial testimony. The woman suffered extreme physical abuse, sexual assault, financial extortion, and was forced to perform labor and services. Federal labor trafficking charges were announced in June 2013. 2 of the 4 pled guilty and received sentences of 4 and 5 years in prison. The other 2 were both convicted on 1 count each of conspiracy to violate laws, forced labor, and acquiring a controlled substance by deception, and were sentenced to 30 and 32 years in prison, respectively. Now let's look at different sex trafficking cases that took place here in Ohio. Investigations of sex trafficking in Ohio showed that perpetrators of commercial sexual exploitation of children can include third parties and parents. Through a grant partnership with the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, in 2014, the Ohio Network of Children's Advocacy Centers identified 83 minors who were victims of human trafficking. In some of these cases, children under 6 years old were sex trafficked by their parents in exchange for drugs, rent, and cash. A child advocacy center representative said, "We think it happens to young girls and runaways. But these youngest kids, it's their actual families who are trafficking them." As another example of sex trafficking in Ohio, from June 15th to June 20th, 2014, the FBI, local, state, and federal law officials conducted Operation Cross Country. Coverage of the operation included areas in northern Ohio such as Cleveland and Toledo. The operation recovered 16 Ohio children from commercial sexual exploitation and arrested 12 pimps. 4 of the children were from Toledo, 1 was from Elyria, and 11 were from Cleveland. An FBI and Elyria police investigation found that the 38-year-old Northeast Ohio man and an Avon Lake woman worked together for months to keep the victims addicted to drugs and then would make them work as prostitutes in exchange for drugs. The man was sentenced to life in prison by a federal judge. In 2015, a Delaware County jury found 2 sisters guilty of running sex-for-pay brothels. The family operated 3 massage parlors in central Ohio and were accused of keeping women against their will and forcing them to sleep on their massage tables. According to news reports, the investigation found that the sisters recruited women from outside the state who were native to China, could not speak English, and had no ties to central Ohio. The defendants led the women to believe that they would be working legitimate massage parlor jobs, but instead forced them to engage in sexual conduct with customers. After a 2-week trial, the defendants were found guilty of promoting prostitution, money laundering, and practicing medicine without a license in furtherance of human trafficking. In October of 2015, the defendants were each sentenced to 10 years in prison under state law. The next section of training will discuss the ways to recognize how human trafficking occurs, as well as the signs and indicators. According to the Polaris Project, in order for a crime to meet the legal definition of human trafficking, The elements of severe forms of trafficking in persons must include an action, means, and purpose. This AMP model helps us understand the federal framework of human trafficking as defined in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Whoever knowingly commits an action, either induces, recruits, harbors, transports, provides, or obtains an individual by means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of either commercial sex acts of labor or services, commits the crime of a severe form of trafficking in persons. In Ohio, the legal definition uses the word compel as the means. In the case of commercial sexual exploitation of a minor under the age of 18, providing the means, or second column, is not required at the federal level. Sex trafficking takes a variety of forms. In the U.S., victims have been forced to work in hostess bars or club operations with inflated price schemes, Eastern European or Russian stripping or exotic dancing go-go clubs, Latino cantina bars, Asian room salons, domestic strip clubs or gentlemen's clubs, residential or underground brothel settings, and for escort services and pimp-controlled prostitution. Pimp-controlled prostitution can be hotel-based, internet, street, or escort-based, as well as services for private parties, services around truck stops, and other locations. Labor trafficking also takes diverse forms. Laborers can be forced into domestic servitude as nannies, maids, and housekeepers, placed in small businesses or mom-and-pop operations, landscaping, nail salons, restaurants, industrial cleaning services, construction, hospitality, street peddling rings or magazine, flowers, and candy sales crews, large-scale labor cases, agricultural settings, and other large factory work environments such as industrial welding. Although assessment of whether an individual is trafficked should be done by law enforcement, social service providers, or medical providers, there are physical, mental, and emotional signs that someone may be a victim of human trafficking. Victims may have poor mental health or exhibit abnormal behaviors such as seeming fearful, anxious, depressed, submissive, tense and nervous, or paranoid. The victim may be unusually fearful or anxious about law enforcement and may avoid eye contact. A victim also might be in poor physical health, appearing malnourished, or showing signs of physical or sexual abuse, physical restraint, confinement, or torture. Victims may demonstrate lack of control over their lives. Indicators of this are having few or no personal possessions, not being in control of their own money, not having any financial records or a bank account, not being in control of their identification documents such as an ID or passport, and they may not be allowed or able to speak for themselves as a third party may insist on being present or translating. In addition to these, potential victims may claim to be just visiting and have an inability to clarify where they are staying or state their address. The victim may have a lack of knowledge of their whereabouts or do not know what city they are in. They have a loss of sense of time, and they have numerous inconsistencies in his or her story. When working with children, understanding the context of the whole child is important when determining whether a child may be a victim of human trafficking. Red flags that may indicate potential victimization in a child are inconsistencies in their stories, references to working long hours, poor pay, or abusive bosses, a dejected demeanor, affect or appearance, unusual knowledge of work, fearful or anxious behavior, the presence of a controlling, abusive, or older boyfriend, possession of gifts or cash that cannot be explained, a chronic pattern of running away, recurrent sexually transmitted infections and need for pregnancy tests, and signs of physical assault, including branding or tattooing, broken bones, black eyes, and other injuries. If you see the signs of human trafficking in a child or adult, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline at 1-888-3737-888 or call 911 if the person appears to be in immediate danger. Professionals who are considered mandatory reporters under the Ohio Revised Code need to report suspected cases involving minors to law enforcement and local child welfare agencies.
My name is Vanessa. I'm from Nelsonville, Ohio. I am not an actress, but there have been times in my past that I wish I was acting. I never imagined that I would be a victim of human trafficking, that I would be tricked, forced, and at times agree to prostitute and solicit for money in order to get the drugs I needed to stay high. The whole time I was getting high, I was trying to hide the scars of my life. Scars from physical and sexual abuse. I was raised in an environment where drugs and alcohol was how everyone dealt with their problems in life. So why wouldn't I do what I learned from the world around me? The pimp, the dope boy, the John, all traffickers, each knows what to look for in people they want to victimize and take advantage of. I had a distorted perception of what loyal was and what love was, and the trafficker exploited my pain for his financial and personal gain at all costs. I was tired of being beaten and battered and down with no self-worth. I was so tired that I just wanted to die. The last time I was out there, I'd been using and up for 8 days. This trafficker, dope boy, grabbed me up by my hair and dragged me down an alley like a caveman. He hit me with a hammer. He took me into this dope house where there was another trafficker with a gun. And at that moment, I realized I didn't want to die. I just couldn't live the way I was living. I couldn't keep dealing with my past with drugs and alcohol. I am no longer a victim. I am no longer a puppet for anyone else. I am strong, courageous, and independent. I am empowered. And now you have an opportunity to help. Learn the signs of human trafficking, whether it's prostitution or people stuck doing hard labor. It may be right under your nose. These victims need your help. Learn the signs. You could help save a life.
Knowing the signs and indicators of trafficking is the first step to helping a potential victim. However, it is important to understand potential challenges to identifying victims given the hidden nature of the crime. Victims often do not self-identify, both out of fear and lack of understanding of their victimization. Traffickers often coach victims to cooperate with them through threats and sometimes violence. Victims are often fearful of harm to themselves and their families, and often feel significant shame from their victimization. They may also mistrust authorities, stemming from fear tactics implemented by traffickers. Victims may feel honor-bound to pay off debts, or may have a trauma bond with their trafficker, which creates loyalty to the trafficker as a coping mechanism. Further, language barriers often stand in the way of identification once a potential victim is spotted. The image shown here is from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Blue campaign, created to combat human trafficking by working with law enforcement, government, non-governmental, and private organizations. This section will provide an overview of the federal legal framework addressing human trafficking. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, TVPA, created the first comprehensive federal law to address human trafficking, with a significant focus on the international dimension of the problem. The law provided a three-pronged approach: prevention through public awareness programs overseas and a State Department-led monitoring and sanctions program, protection through a new T-visa and services for foreign national victims, and prosecution through new federal crimes. Since the passage of the TVPA, this framework of prevention, protection, prosecution, and new partnerships is applied at both the federal and state-level response. As previously discussed, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVPA, was passed in 2000 to prevent human trafficking, protect and assist victims, and strengthen the investigation, prosecution, and punishment of traffickers. The law defines human trafficking as instances of forced labor and sex trafficking. Forced labor involves forcing or coercing victims to perform labor or services. Traffickers might threaten serious harm to the victim or to a third party to make him or her perform labor, or the trafficker might physically restrain the victim, threaten to have the victim deported, or refuse to assist in sponsoring the victim to legalize the victim's immigration status. Sex trafficking occurs when the trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to influence an adult to perform commercial sex acts. A commercial sex act is defined as the exchange of anything of value to any person for a sex act. Any minor under the age of 18 exploited for commercial sex is considered a victim of trafficking. Proof of force, fraud, or coercion is not required. One important legal difference to note is the distinction between smuggling and human trafficking. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, smuggling is a crime that is committed against a U.S. border. It is transportation-based and voluntary, as individuals choose to be smuggled to evade immigration authorities. Trafficking, on the other hand, is a crime against a person and does not require the crossing of a border. It is exploitation-based and involuntary, as victims are coerced or abused. Smuggling can, however, turn into human trafficking. Some trafficking victims originally agree to be smuggled into the U.S. An individual's willingness to be smuggled does not minimize the victimization he or she may experience at the hands of a trafficker. No one wants to become a human trafficking victim. Through the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act, human trafficking victims may be eligible for immigration relief regardless of their immigration status. Immigration relief provides the victim with stability and protection, as well as tools to assist law enforcement in their investigation and prosecution of human trafficking crimes. There are three main types of immigration relief for victims of trafficking. The first type is continued presence, a type of status which provides temporary immigration relief that affords victims a legal means to temporarily live and work in the U.S. during the course of an investigation or prosecution of human trafficking. The second is a T visa, which is a more permanent form of immigration relief that allows a victim to remain and work in the U.S. regardless of his or her manner of entry. A T visa is an immigration remedy specific to victims of a severe form of human trafficking. The third type of immigration relief is a U visa, which is also a more permanent form of immigration relief that allows a victim to remain and work in the U.S. regardless of their manner of entry. A U visa is for victims of certain crimes, including human trafficking. For more information on immigration relief, please call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center at 1-888-3737-888. The following section provides an overview of Ohio's response to human trafficking in the state. Ohio is responding to human trafficking on a state level by creating state laws, implementing agency initiatives such as the Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force through grassroots advocacy coalitions and local victim service, and law enforcement task forces. In 2012 and 2014, Ohio significantly strengthened its legal framework to prevent and respond to human trafficking with positive results. In 2012, the Polaris Project, a nationally recognized anti-human trafficking nonprofit organization, recognized Ohio as one of the 4 most improved states in the U.S. for strengthening its anti-trafficking laws. The goal of Ohio's state laws are 3-pronged: to prevent trafficking through increased public awareness, to protect victims through better victim recovery options, and to prosecute offenders, both traffickers and the purchasers of illicit sex. Ohio's anti-trafficking laws are designed to better reflect federal law and address unique circumstances in our state. Today, Ohio has a strong legal framework in place to help ensure victims receive true justice. In order to increase training and awareness, the Ohio Revised Code requires law enforcement officers to complete trafficking in persons training and to report all human trafficking cases to the Bureau of Criminal Investigations. Additionally, all school personnel are required to take human trafficking training through the annual Safety and Violence Prevention Training. And to increase public awareness about the crime of human trafficking, the Ohio Department of Public Safety's Office of Criminal Justice Services was mandated to create a state public awareness campaign, which was launched in 2014 through anti-trafficking posters, billboards, and other awareness materials. All of these materials are available at humantrafficking.ohio.gov for free to the public. The state's anti-trafficking laws now provide substantial protections for victims of human trafficking. These protections include intervention in lieu of conviction for adults, which allows a court to sentence a human trafficking victim to intervention in lieu of conviction if the victimization was a factor leading to the offender's criminal behavior, and record expungement, which allows survivors of human trafficking to have prior prostitution-related convictions expunged. Ohio's human trafficking statutes now include the following protections for minor victims of human trafficking, including the diversion program for minors, allowing juvenile judges to put minor human trafficking victims into diversion programs to get them services such as trauma therapy. Victims under 16 are permitted to testify at preliminary hearings via closed-circuit TV. Child welfare agencies and courts have the authority to terminate the parental rights of a parent convicted of trafficking his or her own child. The law prohibits disclosure of police reports that are highly likely to identify minor arrestees who are also abuse victims, including human trafficking victims, with the exception of those who need to know, such as prosecutors, law enforcement, probation officers, parents, attorneys, or anyone else under court order. This is to help prevent the identities of child survivors from appearing in the media. Today, Ohio's anti-trafficking laws impose tough penalties for offenders. House Bill 262, signed into law in 2012, made trafficking in persons a felony of the first degree with a mandatory minimum 10-year sentence. Adult sex traffickers must register as sex offenders, and obstruction of justice was made a second-degree felony in human trafficking cases. According to the National Overview of Demand Reduction Efforts, initiatives combating sex trafficking will yield more successful outcomes if purchasers of sex are targeted as well. Strong penalties for traffickers are a critical component of state and federal anti-trafficking statutes. However, even when criminal entities supplying trafficking victims are taken out of the equation, they can be quickly replaced as the demand remains. In order to address demand reduction strategies, the 2014 House Bill 130 increased penalties for solicitation or soliciting another person to engage in sexual activity for hire. The tiered penalties are based on victim vulnerability. Soliciting from an adult is currently a third-degree misdemeanor, including jail time. Soliciting from a person with a developmental disability is a third-degree felony. Soliciting from a minor aged 16 to 17 is a fifth-degree felony, and for a minor under age 16, it is a third-degree felony. In summary, Ohio's laws seek to reinforce the reality that children are victims of sexual exploitation rather than willing participants. For more information on Ohio's anti-trafficking laws, please visit humantrafficking.ohio.gov to download a summary page on our law enforcement efforts emphasizing Ohio's anti-trafficking laws. Through Governor John R. Kasich's Executive Order 2012-06K, signed on March 29, 2012, the Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force was created to help exploited children and adults facing dire circumstances right here in Ohio. Since its creation, 11 state agencies have implemented the 26 recommendations to improve our ability to identify and rescue victims of trafficking, better equip law enforcement to investigate and prosecute crimes of human trafficking, and provide the services and treatment necessary for victims to regain control of their lives. The Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force provides a cohesive state response to the crime of human trafficking and as a result, today we are helping more trafficked and exploited children, women, and men in our state. Today, state agencies are partnering with law enforcement, the Ohio Network of Anti-Human Trafficking Coalitions, the Ohio Human Trafficking Commission, local service providers, and the general public to comprehensively prevent and respond to the crime of human trafficking. With these state, local, and federal partners, there is an unprecedented movement in Ohio to address the exploitation of others in a coordinated response. After the task force was created, the member agencies made and implemented 26 recommendations to more effectively combat human trafficking in the state. Some of these recommendations included hiring a state anti-trafficking coordinator, created a trafficking screening tool used at mental health service providers, victim services, and in Ohio's correctional facilities. Increased access to services for victims of trafficking. Developed and launched a public awareness campaign. Mandated and developed training for new caseworkers that was offered to foster caregivers. And created a multi-agency prevention plan. In January 2014, the Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force launched a statewide public awareness campaign, creating open-source billboards, posters, and fact sheets. All materials can be found on the task force website at humantrafficking.ohio.gov. More than 60 state agencies, boards, and commissions are partnering with the Governor's Task Force to get the message out. They have extensively used the materials throughout 2014 on social media, in community-facing offices such as Ohio's health clinics, seasonal farm worker camps, and correctional facilities. The Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority and the Toledo Area Regional Transit Authority are using the materials throughout their transit centers to reach riders and potential victims. Citizen groups in Dayton, Reynoldsburg, Toledo, and Summit County are leveraging public-private partnerships to use materials locally. As of June 2015, public awareness materials are available in 5 languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, French, and Mandarin. Another key contributor to Ohio's trafficking response are the 4 law enforcement task forces dedicated to investigating human trafficking and crimes against children. These task forces often work in partnership with local coalitions for referrals and services for identified victims. As of 2015, Ohio has 4 human trafficking-specific law enforcement task forces in Northeast Ohio, Northwest Ohio, Southwest Ohio, and Central Ohio. Much of Ohio's response to human trafficking is led at the local level by anti-human trafficking coalitions across the state. The coalitions provide the opportunity for law enforcement, victim services, advocates, faith-based partners, and the general public to work together in a coordinated community response to trafficking and raise awareness. Coalitions are an excellent way to volunteer or join the anti-trafficking movement. Now that you understand the crime of human trafficking, signs and indicators, and how the state and federal government respond to the crime of trafficking, please consider ways you can be involved in the fight against this insidious crime. Most important, if you suspect human trafficking, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline at 1-888-3737-888 or text the word HELP to Be Free. If you suspect that someone is in immediate danger, call 911. Also, check with your agency's internal policy for handling potential situations of human trafficking, as many boards and commissions have established internal protocols for following up on trafficking tips and suspicious activity. For resources and tools for understanding and fighting human trafficking in Ohio, see Ohio's Toolkit for Serving Victims of Human Trafficking at humantrafficking.ohio.gov. Ohio has an online compendium of resources developed by the task force, state partners, local partners, and federal agencies, including a human trafficking screening tool, protocols for serving minors and adults, an overview of state and federal human trafficking laws, speaker request forms, a map of who is doing what and where in Ohio, a data and reports section, and up-to-date news, events, and trainings. Thank you for taking this important step to help Ohio's fight against human trafficking. Our progress as a state in combating trafficking is both exciting and sobering. Today, more victims have access to justice, and more offenders are being punished because of a strong state response, a committed network of victim service providers, and trained law enforcement. However, these efforts confirm what advocates already know. More victims will come out of the shadows of exploitation. More intensive law enforcement investigations will be necessary to lock up traffickers, and more trauma-informed care will need to be made available for survivors. Helping victims to rebuild their lives as thriving survivors and pursuing their traffickers to the fullest extent of the law makes Ohio a safer state for all its citizens.